Hello and welcome to Lex Orandi Lex Credendi. I am Kenny, and well, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my stuff here, so I guess you get to see my face today. Well, anyway, today I'm doing a live on true worship and reverence, and this is due to a dispute that I had the previous day with somebody I do highly respect, whom I will leave nameless for their personal sakes. And anyway, this is a sign of the crisis in the church. We have a Protestant view of worship nowadays in the Novus Ordo. We still have sacrifice in the Novus Ordo, but we don't necessarily have a full understanding of that sacrifice because we have a table blessing sort of view on it. And this idea that, worship and praise are like somehow, and I'm not talking about worship and praise in the literal sense, because obviously praise is part of worship. But what I'm talking about is that, like hands in the air, screaming out Alleluia at random type. And I know that most Novus Ordos are not quite that extreme, but you do have that. And it's this idea that if you suddenly feel a burst coming inside of you, you just suddenly start jumping up and, screaming, hooting, and hollering. I mean, that's what the pagans used to do. And so I don't understand how Protestants think that that's somehow worship. So, I mean, that just shows the crisis that we're in right now in the Catholic Church, that the Protestantization of even just Catholic thought on how to worship, it's just a massive infection. It's a disease in the church. And, in the event that the person I'm referring to ever watches this video, I doubt it because I don't think he subscribes to my channel. But, I do have great respect and honor, great respect and honor that I give to him, because he is a good guy. And I was a little shaken that he, of all people, had this particular disagreement, because me and him actually talk about this stuff all the time. And so, yeah, it was a little jarring, because I get people disagreeing with me on that kind of stuff all the time. I get called pagan by Protestants all the time. I get called an idol worshiper all the time. I get told I'm following a man-made religion. It's like when really, in all, honesty, they're more man-made than any other form of Christianity. Because, and I will reiterate what I have said in the past, that I do not refer to Protestants as Christians, and I will never refer to them as Christians. On an individual level, that is between them and God, whether they truly are or not. but Protestantism as a whole is not Christian. So, but moving on, so yeah, the sacrifice, the altar, and the Eucharist. I mean, those are the main elements of Catholic worship that have been drastically changed. Because the sense of sacrifice is just gone in the Novus Ordo Mass. It's just gone. Completely gone, kaput. Obviously, they say, yes, it's a sacrifice, but the emphasis is not there. So instead of having a emphasis on sacrifice, which is what the Catholic Mass is, you have an emphasis on the Lord's table, which is why you have the table altar. The Eucharist is, of course, the central focal point. In the Novus Ordo, the Eucharist is not the focal point. Now, of course, this varies this varies in different degrees, because some Novus Ordos will actually have a bit more focus on the Eucharist, but the priest is turning his back to the Eucharist, turning his back to God. And as a result of that, you are making the focus of the Mass on the people in the pews, and that is not where the focus is supposed to be. And then, of course, the priest's job, and then, of course, his attire is important. And now this is getting into some of the contradictions that existed in this particular disagreement, because I had spoken with this guy about the problems with the Novus Ordo and the Protestantization of the Mass and of a lot of what people consider Catholic worship in today's world. And we've always agreed on that stuff. And now I'm not so sure that he ever agreed, because I'm starting to think that the only reason he agreed with me was because he basically believed that, whatever you want to do, however you want to worship God, that's how you should be able to worship God, period. And that's not true at all, because God is not, he does not just accept any form of worship. Cain and Abel, good example. When Abel gave his sacrifice, God was pleased with it. When Cain gave his, God was not pleased with it. And so, obviously, there is a proper way to do these things. And so, like from that perspective, if the belief that whatever you feel is you should offer to God is what you should offer to God, well, what's to stop, say, the priest from going to Mass wearing jeans and cowboy boots and a cowboy hat? If that is truly the case, what's to stop the priest from bringing kids up from the congregation and, having having a sword fight up on the altar to make some sort of visual point during his homily? What's to stop the priest from doing a lot of these crazy things if what you feel is what you're supposed to offer up to God. Because these things have happened. Priests have done this, and it has caused uproars. And so why would these things be problems if however you want to worship is acceptable to God? Because there would be no point to worrying about what the priest is doing or not doing up on the altar if in the end your own personal belief on what worship is the truth. All right. And then of course the laity's job. When the laity go up there, there's a certain decorum that has to be had. Just as the priest is supposed to wear the proper attire, he's supposed to wear his chasuble. He's supposed to, I can't think of the names of all the different things that he puts on, but he puts on a lot of very reverent attire. And so the laity have a certain job of their own, a certain way. They're supposed to present themselves. And, getting up and bellowing out songs is not going to, be appropriate. At least not at the sacrifice of the Mass. And so, men should go dressed in at least a button-up shirt and some slacks. You don't necessarily have to go full suit and tie like I do. I wear the 3-piece suit and the whole bit whenever I go to Mass. And I know that not everybody can do that or will do that or whatever. So, so when you present yourself before God, do you start, getting up and shouting things when the priest is doing the liturgy? No, because that'd be disrespectful, not only to the priest who's trying to do his job, but more importantly, and this is above any respect you have for the priest, it's disrespectful to God. And so, so the laity's job is just to go and offer up your prayers with the priest, so that as the sacrifice is being offered, you can lay your prayers down with the priest on the altar with Christ at Calvary. Because when the Mass is going on, you are mystically brought back to Calvary. You are not going to be doing all this weird stuff. It's kind of like that meme that I see on occasion where it shows the cross on Calvary, and then it has like your typical church band, playing like their Christian rock or whatever at the foot of the cross. And the meme goes, if it's not worthy to be at the foot of the cross, then it's not worthy to be at the Mass. And the reason is because you are at the foot of the cross, witnessing the sacrifice being offered in the Mass. It is wholly inappropriate for you to do the charismatic stuff, for you to do the, jumping up and saying amen all of a sudden. And by the way, it's pronounced amen, not amen. That's, again, Protestantism. So, yeah, the behavior in the Mass should be that of silence and prayer. Because when you go before God to worship God, you are offering up your prayers, your concerns, your desires, anybody you have to pray for, you offer up on that altar with the sacrifice of Calvary, which is being offered by the priest. See, you don't offer Christ. The priest offers Christ. And you are there to witness that sacrifice being offered up for you. And so your job is just to sit there, pray, and let the priest do his job. That is how you participate in the Mass. That is how you participate in worship. This idea that you have to get up and do something is completely Protestant. So then the other thing that really bugged me after this debate is I'm sitting here thinking, what is the point of me trying to stir up devotion to the traditional Catholic Mass here in Wichita Falls? What is the point in me making such a big deal about getting away from the Novus Ordo and back to the traditional Latin Mass? Why the Latin Mass? You know, why care about it? Why does it matter? What is the purpose if everybody can just worship the way they want? Because the whole point to the Latin Mass is reverence to God. You want the Latin Mass not because you like the Latin Mass, although you may like the Latin Mass because objectively it is beautiful. And it is, and what is attractive, what is beautiful, is what it is just the way God created things. And so when something is beautiful and you are offering it up to God, you as an individual are going to be attracted to that. And so when you desire the Latin Mass, you're not desiring it for yourself. If you're desiring it because you think it's cool, you think that it's, awesome. Oh, I'm going to this really old Mass. This is so cool. Like I hate when people try to say that, the Latin Mass thing is LARPy, because it's not. But if you're going to the Latin Mass just because it's old, just because it's like, oh, this is how they did it back in the old days, this is so cool, da, 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 and it loses the focus on God, that is LARPy. And so you're doing the tradition, you are doing the Latin Mass, not for yourself, not because of the way you feel. You're doing it out of love for God, because you want to give God the best worship possible. And I'm sorry, but this backyard, barbecue setting that a lot of people want with the Novus Ordo is not appropriate worship to give to God. As a matter of fact, it's not even really worship, because worship requires sacrifice. And, sacrifice, unfortunately, has morphed into a meaning which is not, it's just, what most people call worship is not actually worship. And there's different forms of worship. Like, there's parts in the Bible, and I'm sure Protestant Bibles have probably retranslated that so that it does not come out this way, because, we can't have, the Bible saying, and they worshiped David. So, back in the old days, you would talk about, the worship of the king. the worship of just any person of honor, which honor is due to them. So in today's world, we do have to change it from worship to do honor, reverence, and so forth, and only say worship when we're referring to God. And this is why the Latin terms are actually important, because the Latin terms for worship splits it up into certain categories. Of course, you have latria, which is the due honor and reverence to God alone. And then you've got dulia, which refers to the honor given to saints. And then, of course, hyperdulia is the higher honor given to Mary. So obviously Mary does not get dulia, which is the worship of God, but she does get a higher honor than the rest of the saints. And so when you understand that, then, this argument over, worship with the Protestants, it just gets rather annoying, because they just don't know what the heck they're talking about. Because when you think that, singing hymns and throwing your hands in the air and talking about all these wonderful things and reading from scripture and all that is somehow a sacrifice, when it's not. It requires the actual offering of a victim on an altar for you to worship God. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, so the Protestant infection, unfortunately, is that this whole idea of, the praise and worship type service has crept into the mind of the Catholic. And so everybody thinks that they can just kind of make up their own worship. That is the main key problem with the Novus Ordo. The Novus Ordo is basically a valid mass which has these Protestant elements put into it. It has a blender mix of Protestantism into Catholicism, which is why it is easy for a lot of people to look at the Novus Ordo Mass and be like, oh, it's still Catholic. Well, okay, yes, parts of it are still Catholic. Like the actual consecration is still Catholic. And many of the main big parts, like, for example, the Gloria is obviously Catholic. They have not screwed with that. Some of the prayers at the consecration, not the actual consecration itself, but the surrounding prayers around the consecration, some of them are the same, with minor tweakings. The Confiteor, although basically the same, has had removed, I gotta say it in my head before I can say it. So it has taken out, Mary, Saint Michael, John the Baptist, Peter and Paul, and it just skips to the part where it just says, and all the saints, and you, Father. And so it just totally removes. So I confess to Almighty God, and then it adds, and to you, my brothers and sisters. And yeah, it's a whole mess with the Confiteor. And so these Protestant elements have crept in, this idea that you can just make things up as you go along, which is completely foreign to true worship of God. Like, yes, the Mass has developed over time. Yes, the Mass has had a few tweaks here and there, but they have always been small, natural tweaks and adjustments. No real actual change has ever occurred to the Mass until the Novus Ordo, where the whole thing was just ripped out and totally redone. And part of the reason for that was simply because you had all these Protestants come into they came to the Vatican to help out with, how is this new Mass going to look? What do the Protestants want to see happen in the Mass? And they were asked that. And so a lot of these changes in the Novus Ordo came from Protestantism. The taking away of the emphasis on the sacrifice, and then again, the meal. Now, ultimately, one of the main reasons why we need to return to just straight up tradition is, first off, you are doing all of this for God, again. So the preservation of the faith through the traditional Latin Mass, through traditional catechisms, and then, of course, the proper worship and glory given to God. And why preserve the faith as it was handed down? Well, the reason is because whenever you preserve the faith, you are actually giving all the glory and honor to God, because God gave us a faith. God gave us a true religion. And when you veer off of that, then you are actually turning your back on God when you do that. You are telling God, oh, the way you want to be worshiped, the way you told us to worship you is not good enough. So we're going to go and do our own thing. And that brings us right back to the core problem with that, little predicament I had with my friend at work. And so you can't just come in and say, oh, well, I think we should worship this way. And then all of a sudden you've got mariachi mass or whatever, or a polka mass. You can't do that, because that's disrespectful to God. That is disrespectful to the sacrifice which is occurring on that altar. And so the only reason that anybody should feel any sense of loss when the Latin Mass is deprived, or when, a bishop comes in and says, oh, well, you can't have the Latin Mass, you have to do this new corrupt version of the Mass. The only feeling of loss that you should feel is a loss of your outlet to God, that you are no longer able to give the best worship to God the Father, and that you are now being forced to give an insufficient worship and honor to God. Because although the Novus Ordo may be valid, but it is like preschool Mass compared to the traditional Latin Mass. The traditional Latin Mass is the highest form of worship you could possibly give to God. And so when that is taken away from you, that feeling of loss is not so much for yourself, but it is for God, who is offended by this watered down version of Catholicism. So, yeah, so when you get these people that are hurt, for example, that, the Mass is being taken away from them, it's because they love God. It's not because, oh no, how could you take this beautiful Mass away from us? That's not it at all. What the problem is is that these people are trying to worship God in the most reverent and the most beautiful way possible. And that just gets ripped right from them. Or if you're in my position where, I live in this town of Wichita Falls and I've never had access to the Latin Mass, and I discover the Latin Mass, and I want to give that true, reverent worship to God, and I have to drive 2 hours away just to give that due reverence and honor to God, the highest form of worship that I can give. You can't just sit there and say, oh, just go to the Novus Ordo. See, my personal feelings about the Mass at the end of the day do not matter. What does matter is what I want to give to God, what I should give to God. See, people base a lot of this on feelings. And that is, again, the core of the issue that brought me on here today, is that whenever I talked about this with this guy at work yesterday, I was stunned to find out that he actually got so upset about something that me and him had talked about before. And it made no sense to me, because I was just looking at him like, okay, well, if everything that you're telling me is the case, then why bother? If it doesn't matter how you worship, as long as you do whatever you feel. Because again, it doesn't matter what you feel. What matters is what is due to God. But he's sitting here telling me that if I feel a sudden burst to just sing Alleluia out in the middle of out in the middle of the service, whatever, and start yee-hawing at the top of my lungs or whatever, then that is my due worship and reverence to God. And that I just find that disturbing, because you can't. That's not worship. That's you giving into your emotions. When you go to the Latin Mass, are there emotions? Sure. Are you struck by a sense of awe and reverence? Sure. But you are not required to have those feelings. And people that go to the Latin Mass on a regular basis may still have that sense of awe and reverence whenever they go, but ultimately the entire purpose of going is not your personal feelings about the situation. Your personal feelings are, I don't want to say left at the door, but that seems to be the best way to put it. Your personal feelings about how worship is to be done does need to be left at the door, because when you base it on emotions, that's how you get, cowboy churches. That's how you get, these, churches that, they get people speaking in tongues and spinning around on the floor and all this other stuff. So, I don't know. I feel like this has been more of a rant than a talk, but so I guess the question is, what do you do when you find out that someone you thought was on board and is not? Well, you pray for them. So that's what I'm going to ask everybody here to do. My friend there, that he just pray for him. He definitely needs it. You know, I don't understand why, you know, I don't understand why he would think that, I would be doing all of this effort to try to bring the Latin Mass back to Wichita Falls if it did not matter how you worshiped, because it would be a waste of time if that were the case. So please pray for this guy. He definitely needs to have his heart changed. He had a very Protestant reaction, because that is one of the things I have noticed about a lot of Protestants, is that they base everything on their emotions. And so when you poke the hornet's nest, the demons come out, basically. And they get so upset and they get so offended, and then they turn around and they try to take shots at you, which my friend did yesterday. He got very upset. And then whenever I was trying to just explain what I was saying, it just made it worse. So, pray for him. Pray for me that in the future, if that conversation ends up happening again, that I do a little bit better than I did last time. Although I didn't really say anything offensive. I was just, stating facts, and he just didn't like them. So I do live by the rule of, I just talk. I say what I think. I say what I know to be the truth. And if somebody gets offended by it, that's their problem. Now, obviously, if I go into a situation where I know people are going to get offended and it's not necessary, then I don't say anything. But if I just happen to say something and you get offended, then that is your problem. So it's kind of like these videos that I'm making here on YouTube. You know, whether it be me or whether it be anybody else, you get on here and you say the truth. You try to make these videos where you've figured out things for yourself. You've done the research, and then you talk about it, and then people just come on there and get all offended. It's like, well, if you don't like what I'm saying, just don't watch my videos. I mean, it's that simple. So again, final reiteration on that. Pray for this guy. Again, I'm not going to say his name, because just out of respect for him. So yeah, that just goes into my final thoughts. Pray for people like this. Don't give in to the Protestant idea of worship, where it's like you have to be up and doing something all the time. You don't have to do anything. That's the priest's job. Because in some of my previous videos, I have talked about how, really the priest should be the one doing everything up there. Like, there should not be any laity at all. Definitely not any women up there. Because even with the altar servers, the altar boys, you never had altar girls until JP2. And it's just because women just were not allowed on the altar. It just was forbidden. And now all of a sudden you've got altar girls, you've got women up there lecturing, doing the psalm. And all of that should just not even be there. I mean, the priest should be doing everything, because, see, again, the difference between the praise and worship idea of worship, where it's like, oh, we're offering up our singing and our praying and our whatever, and that's somehow worship. Well, no, that only becomes part of actual like legit worship whenever it is added onto with the sacrifice of Calvary, which is offered on the altar. So the reason why the priest should be doing everything on the altar is because when he is doing a mass, all of the words of the canon, the prayers at the foot of the altar, all of the readings, everything is a sacrifice offered on the altar. That's why when you go to a Latin Mass, the priest does not go to the pulpit to read the scripture verses. Other than during the homily, he will read it in English just so people that don't know Latin, and maybe don't even have a missal with them, can know what the readings were. But during the actual Mass itself, the priest does all of the readings, and he does it facing the altar because the prayers and the words, the readings, everything is offered up as part of the sacrifice and worship to God with the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary. And so when me and you go up there and do that, it's actually wholly inappropriate for, like, say, let's just hypothetically say that I had decided to be a lector and went up there and did a couple of the readings. Well, that doesn't do anything. I mean, we're not there to learn about the faith. The idea of the Mass is you already know the faith. You're supposed to be learning the faith outside of the Mass, not in the Mass. Now, during the homily, Father might have a few things to say that need to be said. And maybe for some people, that's the only time that they're ever going to hear anything out of Father. But the Mass itself has nothing to do with you learning anything. The only thing that you are supposed to get out of the Mass is grace. You're not supposed to get good feelings. You're not supposed to get anything else like that out of it. The only thing you're supposed to get out of it is the acknowledgement that you went to the sacrifice of the Mass, that you offer true worship to God, and that you got the graces for being there. That is the only thing you're supposed to get out of it. How you feel when you leave that Mass does not matter. What matters is the actual reality of the situation, which is that you offered sacrifice to God via the priest, who offered up the sacrifice of Calvary, and that you got the graces. Period. That is it. So, I guess one last thing, and then, okay, so reverence in speech regarding God. I mean, that's why, the Mass is done in Latin, at least if you go to the real one. So the Mass is in Latin because when you're praying to God, you use a language that is not used commonly in the streets. That's one of the problems in the Novus Ordo, is that you're using, the common everyday tongue. And that is very irreverent in regards to God. Now, obviously, you as an individual person doing your own private prayers at home, because obviously not everybody knows Latin. So I'm working on that. I've got the rosary memorized in Latin, so I do the rosary, but eventually I do want to get to where I know Latin well enough to just pray in Latin all the time. But but at minimum, for any liturgical functions, it is inappropriate to use the language of the streets uh, in order to worship God. You have to have a sacred tongue to worship God. And that is all for reverence, because when you enter into the Mass, it should not be like the rest of the world. You should go into the Mass and it be a completely different and separate situation from what you normally view in the world, what you normally hear in the world. And so you need a sacred language. And so reverence in speech not only has to do with using Latin, but it also has to do with uh, like you don't go up to you don't go up to God and say, "Oh, hey God," or you don't go, "What's up, God?" or anything like that. You don't talk to God like that. Yes, okay, fine. God is a loving Father, but he is also the creator of the universe. He is the one who brought you into existence. You could go out of existence in the blink of an eye just by God not thinking about you. And so the awesomeness of God requires a certain amount of reverence. And you can't just go up to God and start, talking to him like he's your buddy at work. You can't talk to him just like a normal person. Now, yes, you can sit and have a conversation, but, when you have a conversation with somebody of importance, do you start joking with them? Do you start, backslapping with them when like, okay, this is a person of importance? You're not going to do that with the Pope, are you? You're not going to do that with the president, are you? Well, you do that with the president, you probably get shot. But I don't know. Our current president would probably like that. He'd probably start sniffing you. But anyway, but the point is you don't talk to God like that. God is higher in respect than anybody you could give respect to here on earth. And so the way you talk to God should not be in any way, shape, or form ordinary. And you should do the best you can. Like, for example, again, what I said about, people not knowing Latin and using, their regular language. Obviously, there's limitations on that. But even if you are limited to whatever your particular language is, you should, to the best of your ability, talk to God in the most reverent manner possible, even with the vulgar tongue. So, anyway, I guess that's just about all I've got. So, just a quick recap. The whole point of this was that an argument had occurred at work over the issue of, people having the ability to just make up their worship as they go along. Like, whatever you feel worship is, that's what worship is. It's like, and that was the whole point to all this. And so I just wanted to get up here and talk about that, because I have noticed that even among just regular church-going Catholics, they may not say it outright, and some may even say it to differing degrees. But a lot of them just do have that idea of, we just make it up as we go along. What we believed yesterday is not what we believe today, kind of thing. How we worship today is it's like, oh, well, that's just how they worship then. We just worship this way now. It's like, no, that's not, that is just not how that works. The worship that we have today should be the exact same worship that they had at the very beginning. Again, natural developments over time, natural developments, not sudden nuclear changes. All right, so I'm going to be rambling if I keep this up much longer. I'm pretty sure I have already rambled, and I see there's a few of you on here. Actually, let me see if... I have no idea how this works here. Apparently, I had some chats on here. This is the first time I've done this and actually had people chatting. So, and I have... Okay. Well, I can't... I'm still new to this live streaming thing, so people will have to forgive me if I'm not looking at comments yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. And... Okay. Well, I guess that's it for today. Until next time, Deus Vult.